Hi, my name is Chris Panza. I'm an associate professor of philosophy here at Drury University. I love zombie movies, only the old ones that have the realistic, slow-moving zombies, not the 21 Days Later or the World War Z running zombie nonsense. I also love Italian cooking and baking, both of which I do quite a lot. Philosophy requires a lot of time spent in your head, exerting a lot of mental effort, so you need to have some other fun things that don't require you to think all that much, or at least let you use your hands or your sense of smell. By the way, I make a mean loaf of Italian bread, way more edible than that nasty loaf of Italian bread that Sandra Weddle makes in architecture. And anybody who's watching this who wants to bring that up to her has my permission. Well, as a humanist, and more specifically as a philosopher, my academic interests tend to center around one really big question. What does it mean to be truly human? I know that sounds like a weird question, because you probably think that being human just means having a specific DNA structure or, of course, not being dead or undead. I think it's a strange question for people today because we're used to thinking that being human is an event. It's not really an achievement. We tend to think that a person is just born human, and that's pretty much the end of it. So being human doesn't really require you to do anything. I'm not quite sure that's right. A lot of humanists and philosophers would say that being human doesn't reduce to just having a certain biology, although it probably requires that you have a basic biological form. Instead, I would argue something pretty different. Something shared by ancient thinkers, such as Socrates or Confucius or Aristotle, and that would be that being human is a pretty remarkable achievement and not an event. Being human is more than just having biology. You actually have to do work to get to the goal. You have to actually do something. Well, I think it means fulfilling a potential that you have to start, to engage with existence in a very special way, a potential that animals just don't have. I mean, think about it for a second. I have a German Shepherd named Gus. Gus is very handsome. He's sweet, very scary looking, but he's very endearing. But for all the cool stuff that's great and true about Gus, my dog, and he never does, I'm pretty sure, is he never sits around and asks himself, what does it mean to be a dog? What kind of dog am I supposed to be? What kind of dog ought I be? And I don't think he ever asks, what's the nature of a dog life well lived? Gus can't pose those questions for himself, and he certainly isn't able to have communal discussions with all the other dogs in the neighborhood, asking those same questions in order to figure out collectively how to best go about thinking through that or other big questions. We can, and that's pretty cool. Now, that said, we don't always engage in those questions, but sometimes we do, but sometimes only very superficially. Or sometimes we ask the questions and then we find very quick answers from authority figures or from society. Socrates recognized this temptation away from really thinking about the questions and instead choosing quick and easy responses. And in response to that, he said his famous quote, "The unexamined life is not worth living." What he meant was that a truly fulfilled and flourishing human life is one that engages in a constant, almost relentless engagement with those big questions. In fact, a much later philosopher from the 19th century, Soren Kierkegaard, said he was constantly searching for that one idea that was worth dying for, because he knew that when he found it, he'd actually now be finally able to truly live. Kierkegaard and Socrates shared a pretty similar thought that really living isn't a matter of just not being dead, but it's actually a way of being, one that at the most fundamental level relies on passionately asking a lot of questions about who we are, what the world is, what's valuable, and what's worth living and dying for. What I can promise is that in a philosophy class, or really any class in the humanities in general, you'll be thoroughly immersed in those questions.
Person point of view on my soda, right? And that's the only perspective I can take on my soda, right? A first-person point.
Since it's a philosophy class, we clearly structure the conversation in a particular way that's unique to what we do. You'll be asked to read through the questions and the arguments and the potential answers that thinkers across history have provided. So we'll ask things like, how did Plato or Descartes or Nietzsche answer those big questions? What did they think about the answers that others gave? More importantly, though, I'd want you to engage with those thinkers. How do you think that their answers were? I mean, how do you respond to what they said? How does what they said alter the kinds of questions that you ask about living life? It's really, in my view, that's pretty much what the humanities does. It takes you by the collar and kind of shakes you around a little bit, right? And it challenges you to take the human part of you seriously. And then it gives some sharpened tools for engaging in that examined life that Socrates thought was the path to living well. I mean, in my view, the most important component of philosophy or of the humanities is that it does help you tap into that humanity. And it helps you to engage in a good life. I can't think of anything more important than that. But that's not all that we do. Engagement with those topics and subjects and questions also has a pretty strong practical value as well. For one, you build up a lot of skills. Once you realize that truly and non-superficially engaging with those big questions isn't just a matter of registering your opinion and then moving on, it gets clear that asking those questions isn't easy. It requires serious analysis, and that requires finely tuned conceptual, logical, argumentative, and critical skills. So when you engage with those questions in a philosophical classroom, you really work on building, fostering, cultivating, and honing those critical thinking skills, not to mention communication, reading, and writing skills. Just as much as lifting weights trains your body, you have to think of rigorous philosophical questions as really an exercise in mental training. So in fact, when people tend to engage in those sorts of cognitive exercises, they find that their reading comprehension skills go up, up, up. It's not surprising that philosophy majors specifically have the highest verbal and writing scores on the GRE, #1 out of 50. And we're #3 on the LSAT, the law school examination, #5 on the graduate management exam. You build up a lot of awesome cognitive habits as well. There's a lot more to education than learning content and skill, although that's important too. Education should be about teaching intellectual virtues and habits, some of which are things like open-mindedness, the capacity to transcend your own way of thinking, analyze other ways of seeing the world, intellectual courage, the ability to step forward and ask the hard questions, even when such questions cause you discomfort. And I also like to stress intellectual humility, which is the ability to always be on the lookout for new, fresh perspectives, and also a love of knowledge. I want students to walk away with a love of the project of always wanting to understand and investigate more and more things, because after all, isn't that really what it means to be human?